Tonight, we need to talk about something that should terrify every American who values the Atlantic Alliance. Because what's happening right now in European waters isn't just about Ukraine anymore. It's about us. 7 days ago, CNN broke a story that sent shockwaves through Western intelligence agencies. Russia's so-called shadow fleet, those rusting oil tankers Moscow uses to evade sanctions, they're not just smuggling oil. They're floating spy platforms, and they've been operating right under NATO's nose for years. According to Western and Ukrainian intelligence sources who spoke to CNN, Russian personnel with direct links to Moscow's military and security services have been covertly working aboard these vessels, conducting surveillance operations in European waters. We're talking about former FSB officers, GRU operatives, people with security clearances posing as ordinary crew members on oil tankers. These aren't just sailors. They're intelligence assets. The implications are staggering. These ships sail through some of the most strategic waterways in Europe, the Baltic Sea, the North Sea, the English Channel. They're mapping undersea infrastructure. They're monitoring NATO naval movements. They're identifying vulnerabilities in critical cables and pipelines. And they're doing it while simultaneously helping Putin fund his war machine by selling sanctioned oil. One intelligence official told CNN that Russians with security backgrounds have been added to shadow fleet crews specifically for this dual purpose. This isn't accidental. This isn't opportunistic. This is systematic, coordinated hybrid warfare. And here's what should really wake people up. The European Union just sanctioned 12 individuals and 2 entities for Russian hybrid threats just 10 days ago. But the shadow fleet keeps sailing. The intelligence gathering continues. The threat is accelerating, not diminishing. This revelation came just hours after another cable was damaged in the Baltic Sea, the latest in a series of suspicious incidents that have plagued Europe's critical infrastructure. Coincidence? European officials don't think so, and neither should we. Let's talk about what's been happening to Europe's infrastructure, because this is where theory meets terrifying reality. The Associated Press just published an investigation tracking 145 cases of sabotage and disruption that Western officials directly blame on Russia since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. 145 incidents. Let that sink in. In November 2024, 2 submarine fiber optic cables were severed in the Baltic Sea within 48 hours of each other. The first connected Finland to Germany, the Sea Lion 1 cable, the only direct data link between these NATO allies. The second linked Sweden to Lithuania. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said what everyone was thinking: no one believes these cables were cut accidentally. Finland seized a Russian oil tanker, one of those shadow fleet vessels, after investigators found evidence linking it to cable damage. The ship's anchor had been dragging across the seafloor, systematically severing critical communications infrastructure. This wasn't negligence. The anchor patterns showed deliberate targeting. But it gets worse. Just last week, another undersea power cable connecting Finland and Estonia was damaged. Same pattern, same Baltic Sea location, same type of vessel in the vicinity. Finnish authorities are now investigating whether this is the same Russian shadow fleet ship involved in previous incidents. According to a groundbreaking report from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Russia's military doctrine deeply integrates critical national infrastructure sabotage within what they call hybridная vojna, hybrid warfare. This isn't improvisation. This is doctrine. This is strategy. This is how Russia fights when it can't win conventionally. Amazon's Threat Intelligence Unit just issued a warning that should be headline news everywhere. Russian GRU hackers, specifically Unit 74455, also known as Sandworm, have been conducting a years-long campaign targeting Western critical infrastructure from 2021 to 2025. They've been exploiting misconfigured network edge devices in energy companies, water treatment facilities, telecommunications networks. The campaign is ongoing right now, today. And here's the genius and the horror of what Russia is doing. They're creating what intelligence analysts call strategic ambiguity. Is it sabotage or accident? Is it state-sponsored or criminal? Is it GRU or just a reckless ship captain? The uncertainty itself becomes a weapon. Now let me tell you about the ground game, because what's happening underwater and in cyberspace is only half the story. Russia has built a human network of saboteurs across Europe, and they're recruiting them in the most modern way possible: social media. The Guardian published a devastating investigation in May showing how Russian intelligence services are using encrypted messaging apps, particularly Telegram, to recruit ordinary Europeans to conduct sabotage operations. We're not talking about trained spies, we're talking about teenagers, low-income workers, people desperate for cash, disposable assets, as one intelligence official described them. In Lithuania, someone recruited online set fire to an IKEA store. In Britain, 7 people were charged over an arson attack on a business with Ukrainian links. In Poland, Russian intelligence orchestrated an arson attack on a Warsaw shopping center that nearly destroyed the entire complex. The pattern repeats across the continent: small payments via cryptocurrency, encrypted instructions, local actors willing to set fires or plant devices without understanding the larger strategic picture. Germany's Interior Ministry announced earlier this month that they're witnessing a massive increase in threatening hybrid activity by Russia, ranging from disinformation campaigns to cyber attacks to physical sabotage. German officials are now treating this as an undeclared war on their soil. UK intelligence agencies reveal that investigations into Russian interference have now moved beyond hypothetical threats to active criminal prosecutions. In March 2024, British men set fire to Ukrainian-linked businesses in coordinated attacks across London. The perpetrators? Young men recruited online, paid a few £1,000s, told to film themselves committing arson, and send the videos back to their handlers in Russia. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Russia is conducting an escalating and violent campaign of sabotage and subversion against European and US targets in Europe, led by Russian military intelligence. This isn't rhetoric. The US Helsinki Commission just published a report titled "Spotlight on the Shadow War," documenting Russia's systematic attacks on NATO territory. What Russia has figured out is cost asymmetry. For a few €1,000s, they can force European nations to spend millions on increased security investigations, repairs. They're draining resources. They're exhausting security services. They're forcing democracies to adopt more surveillance, more restrictions, more security measures, which plays right into Putin's narrative that Western democracy is weak and paranoid. Let's move to the cyber domain, because this is where Russia's hybrid warfare becomes truly sophisticated and truly dangerous. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CSA, issued an advisory just 7 days ago about GRU-backed hacktivists conducting what they call opportunistic attacks against critical infrastructure. But here's what opportunistic really means in intelligence speak. GRU Unit 74455 likely funded the tools that these so-called hacktivist groups use to conduct distributed denial of service attacks. They're creating plausible deniability by using proxy groups while maintaining operational control. It's mercenary warfare applied to cyberspace. Amazon Web Services, in an extraordinary public disclosure, revealed that APT-44, a GRU cyber unit, has been conducting a multi-year campaign targeting Western energy infrastructure. From 2021 to 2025, these Russian state hackers have been exploiting misconfigured network edge devices in energy companies across Europe and North America. They're inside systems right now. Persistent access. Waiting. The Wall Street Journal reported that suspected Russian hackers have significantly stepped up attacks on US and European energy firms, with research showing a clear correlation between geopolitical tensions and cyber intrusion attempts. France recently accused the GRU of waging sustained cyber attacks against French ministries, defense contractors, and media outlets specifically aimed at undermining support for Ukraine. Denmark's intelligence service issued a stark warning about Russian cyber threats targeting their water systems and electoral infrastructure. This is a NATO founding member, one of the most digitally advanced nations on Earth, openly stating that Russia is targeting the water their citizens drink and the elections that sustain their democracy. The MI6 chief, in a rare public speech 15 days ago, warned that the front line is everywhere and signaled Britain's intent to sharpen its operational edge with audacity against Russian threats. For the head of Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service to speak this openly about Russian threats means the situation has become critical. Here's what keeps intelligence officials awake at night. Russia isn't just probing defenses, they're pre-positioning access. Think about what that means. In a future conflict, Russia could simultaneously shut down power grids, contaminate water systems, sever internet connectivity, and disable emergency services, all while their shadow fleet monitors NATO's naval response and their saboteurs create chaos on the ground. The Atlantic Council assessment is blunt. Moscow's goal is not just to damage infrastructure, but to sow distrust inside Western societies. When your water system gets hacked, when your internet goes down, when undersea cables mysteriously break, you start questioning whether your government can protect you. That doubt, that fear, that erosion of confidence in democratic institutions, that's the real target. So what is NATO doing about all this? What is the West's response to this shadow war? And this is where we get to the really difficult questions. The European Union has imposed sanctions. Yes, they've sanctioned individuals. They've sanctioned entities. Just this month, the EU sanctioned 12 more people linked to Russian information manipulation and cyber attacks. But sanctions haven't stopped the shadow fleet. Sanctions haven't prevented cable sabotage. Sanctions haven't shut down the recruitment networks. NATO held an emergency meeting after the Baltic cable incidents. They issued strong statements. They promised increased vigilance. But here's the problem. What's NATO's actual response supposed to be? Do you sink a Russian oil tanker because it's conducting surveillance? Do you shoot down a ship because its anchor cut a cable? At what point does sabotage become an act of war that triggers Article 5? This is Russia's strategic calculation. They're operating in what military theorists call the gray zone, below the threshold of conventional warfare, but above the level of simple criminal activity. Each individual incident is deniable, ambiguous, just barely not worth going to war over. But the cumulative effect is devastating. The Center for European Policy Analysis published a report just 3 weeks ago titled "The Hybrid Threat Imperative: Deterring Russia Before It Is Too Late." The title alone tells you where we are, before it's too late, because there's a growing consensus among European security officials that it may already be too late to prevent escalation. We're already in the escalation. UK experts issued a warning just hours ago that Europe is unprepared for potential war with Russia. Not potential hybrid war, potential actual war. The ECFR published an assessment of the threat to Estonia, a NATO member, that examines the current state of Russian forces, Estonian defenses, and NATO's evolving posture. The fact that this analysis is necessary tells you everything. Germany is now openly accusing Russia of conducting a hybrid war on German soil. Britain's defense establishment is restructuring for a threat environment that assumes ongoing Russian hostility. Poland has become one of the most militarized nations in Europe, not because they're aggressive, but because they're terrified. The US has responded by increasing military aid to frontline NATO states, by enhancing cyber defenses, by sharing more intelligence. But there's a disconnect between the severity of the threat and the coherence of the response. The Washington Examiner quoted security officials saying, "The West is facing threats once considered unimaginable from Russia." And here's the brutal truth that nobody wants to say out loud. Russia is testing NATO's collective defense commitment without firing a shot across a border. If Russian saboteurs blow up a power station in Poland, is that an armed attack? If Russian hackers shut down Germany's water system, does that trigger Article 5? If Russian ships systematically sever every undersea cable connecting Europe, what's the proportional military response? So let me bring this home, because this isn't just Europe's problem. This is America's problem. This is the defining security challenge of our era. CNN published an analysis just today, literally hours ago, titled "The Shadow Russia Casts Over Europe Has Forced It to Face the Truth. The Risk of War is Once Again Real." There's a growing consensus among experts that Russia is already waging hybrid war on the West, not preparing for war, already waging it. The numbers tell the story. Since 2022, 145 documented sabotage incidents, dozens of cable cuts, hundreds of cyber attacks, thousands of recruited saboteurs, a shadow fleet of intelligence-gathering vessels, a systematic campaign to map, penetrate, and prepare to destroy the critical infrastructure that keeps 450 million Europeans alive and functioning. This is what modern warfare looks like. This is how a revanchist power with conventional military limitations fights a technologically superior alliance. You don't invade, you infiltrate, you don't declare war, you wage it in shadows through proxies with plausible deniability. The Foreign Policy Research Institute just published analysis on hybrid warfare in Europe against US interests. Because make no mistake, every attack on European infrastructure, every undermining of NATO cohesion, every successful intimidation of a European ally, that weakens America's strategic position globally. China is watching this. Beijing is taking notes on how Russia uses hybrid tactics to challenge a military alliance without triggering collective defense. Iran is watching. North Korea is watching. If Russia can systematically sabotage critical infrastructure in NATO countries without meaningful consequences, what message does that send to every other adversary?
The Center for European Policy Analysis report on Russian shadow warfare is explicit to secure its grip on power. Russia adopts Soviet practices coupled with modern tactics of covert influence, violence, and manipulation. This is neo-Soviet strategy with 21st century tools. And it's working.
European capitals are waking up. The British government is restructuring intelligence priorities. Germany is overhauling security protocols. Finland and Estonia are militarizing their civilian infrastructure protection. Poland is becoming the arsenal of democracy's eastern frontier. But waking up is not the same as being prepared. The nightmare scenario isn't some hypothetical future Russian invasion. The nightmare scenario is what's happening right now, today, this week. The systematic degradation of the infrastructure, institutions, and confidence that hold democratic societies together. That's the brutal wake-up call. And here's the final uncomfortable question. If Russia has been conducting this shadow war for 3 years, mapping our vulnerabilities, recruiting saboteurs, pre-positioning cyber access, building intelligence networks, what happens when Putin decides to flip the switch? What happens when those aren't tests anymore? NATO has never faced a threat quite like this. The Atlantic Alliance was designed to stop tanks rolling across the German plain, not to counter encrypted telegram messages recruiting arsonists, not to defend against shadow fleet surveillance, not to respond to systematic cable sabotage that's technically not war. This is Europe's nightmare. But it's about to become America's reality. Because the shadow war Russia is waging in Europe, it's coming here. It's probably already here. We're just not looking closely enough yet. That's tonight's story. We'll be right back.